This is the fat pig we have to put up with. That voice, light, sharp, and dripping with contempt, cut through the music like glass across silk. I froze, one hand still on my wine glass, the other clutching the silver clutch that matched my lilac gown. Every conversation around me stopped. Every polished head turned. It took a second before I realized the voice belonged to Veronica Graves, my new daughter-in-law. She stood a few feet away, framed by the chandeliers of the Grand Marquette Hotel ballroom, smiling sweetly at a group of people I hadn't yet met. And just like that, I became the evening's entertainment. My name is Penelope Harding, and I am 68 years old. I have survived 2 market crashes, 1 marriage, and the slow cruelty of being underestimated. I have also learned that silence, when used with intention, can buy you more power than 1,000 words ever could. But at that table, on the day my only son married the woman who had just called me a fat pig, I stayed silent for a different reason. I wanted to see how far they would go. The Graves family was everything my son Julian once believed he wanted. They were old money charm and polished arrogance. The father, Douglas Graves, was a name often whispered in banking circles. His wife, Camille, the kind of socialite who never aged, only crystallized. Veronica had her mother's posture and her father's smile, sharp, rehearsed, expensive. As she introduced me to her circle, she placed a manicured hand on my arm. "This is Penelope Harding," she said lightly. "Julian's mother." Then, that voice again, almost playful but meant to sting. "The fat pig we have to put up with." A ripple of laughter circled the group like champagne fizzing out too fast. I felt the blood rise to my cheeks. My lilac silk sleeves seemed tighter. My pulse pounded in my ears. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I took a slow sip of wine instead, watching the golden liquid tremble against the glass. The chandelier's reflection broke across it like fractured light. A woman to my left, probably one of Camille's friends, covered her mouth as if embarrassed. Douglas adjusted his cufflinks and glanced down, avoiding my eyes. It was the kind of silence that eats oxygen. I remembered something my late husband Edward used to say, "In finance, never interrupt a fool who's revealing herself." So I didn't. Julian stood a few tables away, unaware of the scene his bride had staged. His eyes were soft when they met mine. He was still glowing from the ceremony, from the promise of new beginnings. I didn't have the heart to tell him that his wife had just humiliated me in front of a room filled with people who measured worth by waistlines and last names. Instead, I smiled. Small, careful, unshaken. The kind of smile that disarms before it strikes. "Veronica," I said softly. She blinked, startled by the fact that I had spoken at all. "I'm glad to finally meet your family. They seem very familiar." Something flickered in Douglas's eyes. Recognition, confusion, a shadow of something he couldn't place. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That was my first clue. Dinner followed. Plates of roasted duck, champagne flowing like rivers, music swelling as if to wash away the sting. I kept to myself, answering polite questions, nodding through shallow compliments. Camille asked where I lived. "East Bay," I said. "A quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant." A harmless lie. My estate overlooked the bay with a view worth more than their family's entire portfolio. But humility is an art form, one I had perfected. Halfway through dessert, as the string quartet began another waltz, Douglas raised his glass toward me. "Mrs. Harding, what line of work were you in?" he asked. Banking, I said simply, though it's been a while since I've seen a boardroom. His eyes narrowed. Which firm? Before I could answer, Veronica laughed, cutting him off. Oh, come on, Daddy. Don't interrogate her. She probably managed a local branch or something. More laughter. Soft, privileged, poisonous. I set my glass down. Actually, I said, keeping my tone even, I was a chief financial officer, years ago, before retirement. Douglas froze. The color drained from his face, the way sand slips from an hourglass. What did you say your last firm was? He asked quietly. Everwest Holdings, I replied. The name landed like a dropped gavel. The air shifted. Camille's hand hovered mid-air, her spoon forgotten. Veronica's smile faltered, a fine crack splitting porcelain. Douglas's voice was hoarse when he spoke. Everwest? You're the chairwoman? His words echoed across the table. The nearby conversations dimmed. Julian looked up from across the room, sensing something. I gave Douglas a small nod, nothing more. And in that moment, every whisper, every snicker, every insult turned to stone. The same man whose daughter had called me a fat pig was now realizing he worked for me, had been working for me, for the past 3 years. His company, Graves Capital, had been absorbed by Everwest after a near collapse. I had signed the acquisition papers myself. His signature was the one trembling beneath mine. He stared at me, pale, speechless, the memory dawning behind his eyes. Silence swallowed the table. I adjusted my pearl earring, smoothed the sleeve of my gown, and lifted my wineglass once more. The gold liquid caught the light, steady now. I looked at Veronica. Her lips parted, the confidence draining from her like spilled champagne. I suppose, I said quietly, we all have to put up with someone. The string quartet swelled again, trying to rescue the room. It failed. Some moments don't need volume to make an impact. They just need truth, revealed at the perfect time. And that was mine. I didn't stay long after that. My heels clicked softly across the marble floor as I left the ballroom, my head high, my silence louder than their laughter. By morning, every guest in that hall would remember one thing. Not the bride, not the champagne, not the flowers, but the moment the fat pig turned out to be the woman who owned their bank. I woke early the next morning to the pale hush of fog rolling over the bay. The city was still half asleep, but I had been awake since dawn, replaying every second of the night before, the chandeliers, the laughter, the moment Douglas Graves realized who I was. My tea sat untouched beside a stack of neatly arranged folders. Old habits die hard. Even after retirement, I still needed my paperwork to speak louder than any rumor. For years, I had mastered the art of existing between worlds, visible enough to be underestimated, invisible enough to build an empire without interference. People called me many things: widow, retiree, mother. None of them knew the truth. Before I became chairwoman of Everwest Holdings, I was a chief financial officer at an investment bank in New York. Numbers had always been my language, unforgiving, precise, and loyal to logic. My late husband, Edward, once teased that I had more trust in spreadsheets than in people. He wasn't wrong. When he passed, everything I thought was solid crumbled overnight. Grief does strange things to time. It slows the clock, but accelerates decisions. I found myself unable to rest, pouring every ounce of energy into the one thing I could control: my work. It started small. A shell company here, a quiet partnership there. I learned that the less you spoke, the more people revealed themselves. In boardrooms full of men who mistook politeness for weakness, silence became my sharpest tool. Within a decade, I had quietly assembled a network of acquisitions under a single umbrella, EverWest Holdings, a structure so layered it could have been mistaken for myth. They called me the ghost investor because no one ever saw my name on a press release. I didn't crave the spotlight. I craved security, not the kind that comes from fortune, but from control, the power to build without asking for permission. When the 2008 crash shattered institutions that once thought themselves immortal, I didn't flinch. I had no shareholders to answer to, no board of directors to appease. While others scrambled for bailouts, I acquired banks, funds, lending institutions, all hidden behind corporate veils that led eventually to me. By the time the world steadied again, EverWest owned stakes in more than a dozen regional banks. One of them was Graves Capital, the pride of Douglas Graves, a legacy built on risky loans and unearned arrogance. When his balance sheets began bleeding red, his pride blinded him to the lifeline I extended. He thought he was selling to an anonymous consortium. He never imagined the woman behind the curtain once sat quietly at the end of his own boardroom table. That irony was not revenge. It was simply math. As the sun climbed higher, the fog thinned. I opened a folder marked EverWest, Graves Acquisition 2019. The ink on the signatures had faded slightly, but I could still see it. Douglas W. Graves trembling beside Penelope A. Harding. It wasn't the value of the purchase that stayed with me. It was the lesson. People like Douglas believed ownership meant visibility. To them, power required applause. But real power was different. Real power was freedom, to act without spectacle, to move without echo. I sipped my now cold tea, eyes drifting toward the silver pen resting on the desk. Edward had given it to me the year I closed my first major deal. "For every decision you'll make in silence," he said. 15 years later, I still use that pen to sign every acquisition, every decision, every company, every quiet rescue. The irony was bitterly poetic. The same family that laughed at me last night now owed their livelihood to the portfolio I had built from grief. The same daughter who called me a fat pig was living off dividends from a bank she thought her father still owned. But this wasn't about humiliation anymore. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing for war, one fought not with anger, but with documents and deadlines. People forget that in finance, silence isn't passivity, it's strategy. And last night, Veronica Graves had declared a very public battle she didn't know how to fight. My phone buzzed. A new message from Harold Finch, my attorney and oldest confidant. Douglas Graves has requested access to shareholder records, possibly fishing for leverage. Shall I deny? I typed back. No. Let him look. He won't find what he's hoping for. Because I knew exactly what Douglas feared most. Discovering that the woman he once dismissed now signed his paychecks. I leaned back, watching the city wake. Across the bay, ferries traced soft lines through silver water. Somewhere downtown, bankers were already pouring coffee, believing they understood control. But control isn't loud. It isn't proud. It's quiet, deliberate, and patient. Last night reminded me that invisibility isn't weakness. It's armor. And if the Graves family wanted to test mine, they were about to learn what it was made of. Morning light filtered through the curtains, thin and cautious, as if afraid to touch the air. The apartment smelled faintly of Earl Grey and toasted bread, though neither brought comfort. My mind was still tangled in the echoes of last night. The laughter, the sudden silence, the look on Douglas Graves's face when he realized who I was. Some truths have a weight that lingers long after the music stops. Across the table, My son Julian stirred his coffee with the distracted rhythm of someone searching for the right words. He had arrived earlier than usual, dressed in yesterday's suit, tie loosened, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. He hadn't even knocked. He still had his old key, though he rarely used it. "Mom," he said finally, his voice careful, almost rehearsed. "Last night, I need to understand what happened." I set my cup down, keeping my tone even. "What part of it?" "At the reception. Dad-in-law pulled me aside after you left. He looked shaken, almost scared. He asked me questions about you, about your old work, about the bank merger 3 years ago." Julian paused, studying me. "He thought you were someone else. Someone powerful." My spoon clinked against porcelain. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing, because I didn't know what to say." He leaned forward. "Mom, is there something you haven't told me?" I looked at him. The boy who used to bring me hand-drawn charts as birthday gifts, who once believed numbers could fix everything. His hair was darker now, temples streaked with worry lines that came too early. He reminded me of his father in moments like this, earnest and searching. "There are things," I said slowly, "that were easier left unsaid, for your peace, not my pride." Julian exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Douglas seemed sure. He said your name sounded familiar. He mentioned Everwest Holdings. The name hung between us like smoke. "I read something once," Julian continued, "about a quiet acquisition. His bank got bought out. He lost the board seat. The article never mentioned who led the purchase." His voice dropped. "Was it you?" I didn't answer right away. Outside, a ferry horn drifted across the bay, low and distant. The sound filled the silence like a confession I wasn't ready to make. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed beside the teapot. A new email. The subject line was blunt. "Request for access. Shareholder records." The sender? Douglas W. Graves. Julian caught the look on my face. "Is that from him?" I opened it with one tap. The message was short. "Douglas Graves formally requests shareholder documentation regarding Everwest Holdings' controlling interests. Immediate response requested." He wasn't just curious. He was digging. "Mom?" Julian pressed. I closed the phone, slid it face down. "It's nothing urgent. He didn't buy it. He's trying to find out who you are." I met his eyes. "Then he'll have to work for it." Julian pushed his chair back, pacing the kitchen. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? That you were still involved, that you—" He stopped himself, lowering his voice. "Douglas thinks you're dangerous." That word stung, though I understood it. People fear what they can't see, especially men who built empires on visibility. "I never wanted you to carry my shadows," I said. "You had your own path. You deserved a life not defined by balance sheets and mergers." "I work in finance, Mom," he reminded me. "It's literally defined by those things." I allowed myself a faint smile. "Maybe I hoped you'd find a gentler version." He sighed, sitting again. "Veronica asked questions too. She said your last name sounded familiar when we started dating. I thought she was being polite, but now I'm not so sure." My chest tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Little ones. About our family's background, about Dad's pension, about whether you still had connections on Wall Street." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "She's not just curious, is she?" I stirred my tea, letting the steam rise between us. "Curiosity isn't free, Julian. Someone always pays for it." He studied me, trying to read the truth on my face. "You're hiding something big." "Not hiding," I said softly. "Protecting." The kettle clicked, signaling the end of its warmth. I stood, refilled my cup, and turned toward the window. Across the bay, the skyline gleamed in morning light, tall and indifferent. "Mom," Julian said quietly, "I love you, but I need to know what kind of storm you've pulled us into." I looked back at him, the steam curling between us like a thin veil, one that started long before last night, and one I can handle. He shook his head, half frustrated, half afraid. "Veronica won't let this go. Neither will her parents. They don't like surprises." "Then they should have been kinder guests," I replied. Julian tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I always am." He nodded slowly, stood, and placed a hand on my shoulder before leaving. The door closed behind him with a muted click. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, watching sunlight spill across the marble counter. The phone buzzed again, another alert from my legal team. "Unusual inquiry detected. Ever-West Central account flagged for review." So, Douglas Graves wasn't just looking, he was prying. And in finance, prying is never innocent. It's the first move before a war. The restaurant was one of those places that pretended not to care about money while charging a fortune for simplicity. White walls, crystal glasses, a single rose on every table. Its name, Westbrook, suggested warmth, but everything about it was calculated coolness. I arrived 10 minutes early. It was a habit I'd never broken. People reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. Outside, the air carried the faint scent of rain and salt from the nearby bay. Inside, the hum of conversation mixed with the soft scrape of cutlery. A hostess led me to a corner table near the window, where sunlight fell across the linen like poured milk. Veronica arrived 3 minutes late, the perfect balance between polite and powerful. She wore ivory silk and a smile trained to perfection. To anyone else, she might have looked like a gracious new bride taking her mother-in-law to lunch. But I had spent decades studying faces across boardrooms. Her eyes told a different story. Tight, hungry, cautious. "Mother Harding," she said, sliding into her seat. "You look lovely. Lilac again. It suits you." I nodded. "Habit, I suppose." "Habits tell stories," she replied, signaling the waiter with a flick of her hand. "2 glasses of Bordeaux, please. The 2012. An expensive choice for a casual lunch. I wondered what story she wanted to tell. The waiter poured, and we clinked glasses. The wine caught the light, ruby red, confident. "I wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding at the wedding," she began. "Sometimes nerves make people say foolish things." "That's true," I said. "Nerves, or entitlement." Her smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. "Of course. Still, I hope we can start fresh. After all, we're family now." Family. A word that sounded different depending on who said it. In her mouth, it was strategy. She reached into her purse and drew out a slim folder, setting it gently between us. "I brought something I thought you might find interesting. I'm assisting Daddy with some post-merger analysis. You know, ever since that whole acquisition thing." "Ah," I said, swirling my wine. "The thing that left him without a board seat." Her jaw flexed, but she kept her tone light. "Yes, that one." She tapped the folder. "We're trying to understand the shareholder structure. So many layers, so many shell companies. It's practically a maze." "Transparency can be difficult when there are too many mirrors," I said. She opened the folder, sliding a single sheet toward me. A chart, familiar if a little crude. Arrows connecting corporations, dotted lines, offshore entries. And there, faint but legible, the letters EH Capital LLC. She tilted her head. This one caught my eye. Do you happen to know who's behind it? The air between us thinned. EH, Edward Harding, my late husband, one of the earliest shells I'd built, long before EverWest took shape. She had done her homework. I looked down at the chart, then back at her. Why do you ask? Veronica sipped her wine, savoring it like victory. Just curiosity. You see, Daddy's concerned. He thinks whoever owns this structure might be manipulating control. It would be such a shame if someone were hiding influence behind layers of anonymity. Would it? I asked. I've always believed discretion is a virtue, especially in finance. She smiled, slow and deliberate. Maybe in the past, but regulators love a good secret. They turn it inside out just to see what spills. I folded my napkin carefully. Is this your way of warning me? Not at all, she said sweetly. Just a friendly conversation. We're both women in a man's world, aren't we? We understand the value of foresight. Foresight, I repeated. An interesting word for someone whose family nearly lost a bank. The mask slipped, just for a moment. You think you know everything, she murmured. No, I said. I just know what I build and what I buy. She leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. You may have bought the bank, but you didn't buy the legacy. People still remember who founded it. Legacy is what remains when truth fades, I replied. And truth has a way of resurfacing. Her voice softened, almost pitying. You're impressive, Mrs. Harding. Truly. But maybe it's time to let the next generation take the lead. Control can be lonely. I'm used to lonely, I said. She laughed lightly, finishing her wine. Well, I won't keep you. I just wanted to clear the air. Daddy's team might reach out for clarification. I'm sure you'll have nothing to hide. Nothing at all, I said. She rose, smoothing her skirt. Enjoy the wine. It's a rare vintage. So am I said. Her steps clicked softly across the marble floor, fading into the hum of the restaurant. I sat for a long moment, fingers tracing the rim of my glass. The chart lay open beside my plate, its lines crisscrossing like scars. She had found one of the doors, but not the lock. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. A single message to Harold. She's looking. Be ready. Outside, clouds gathered over the bay, the light shifting from gold to gray. Some storms announce themselves with thunder. Others begin with a single glass of wine. This one tasted like Bordeaux and betrayal. By the time I returned home from Westbrook, the afternoon light had turned brittle, the kind that made every surface shine too sharp, every corner feel exposed. I placed my purse on the counter, slipped off my heels, and exhaled the kind of breath that carried more thought than air. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. I liked it that way. Silence had always been my most loyal ally. It kept secrets better than people ever could. But that afternoon, the silence carried a question. How long had Veronica been digging, and who was helping her? I walked into my study, a room lined with shelves of leather-bound ledgers and old photographs, snapshots of a life built quietly, layer by layer. On the desk sat my laptop, beside a porcelain cup half filled with cold tea. I opened it, keyed in my password, and pulled up EverWest's financial dashboard. Numbers had never lied to me. They told stories, whispered warnings, revealed motives. Today, they told me something new. 2 large withdrawals. Same week, same source. Both issued under Graves Family Holdings, LLC. amounts big enough to suggest desperation, small enough to stay under board scrutiny. I leaned closer, reading the line item again. The loan guarantor wasn't Douglas. It wasn't Camille. It was Veronica Graves Harding. I felt the faintest tug of disbelief, then clarity. She had used EverWest Capital, my capital, to fund her own family's stability. The same woman who called me a fat pig at her wedding had been feeding from my trough all along. I reached for the phone and called Harold Finch, my legal advisor. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm as always. "Afternoon, Penelope. I was just reviewing the Graves inquiry from this morning." "There's something else," I said. "2 recent disbursements from EverWest's trust account, both tied to Graves family holdings. I want full documentation, loan terms, co-signers, everything." A pause, then the faint sound of typing. "Found them. Bridge loans approved last quarter. Application pushed through by an intermediary. Looks like Veronica was the signatory. Purpose of funds? Debt restructuring. Personal assets used as collateral. Jewelry, vehicles, 1 partial deed to a property in Marin. Risk rating? High," he said. "Too high for our standards. Whoever processed this did it quietly." "She used her marriage as access," I murmured. "Not affection." "That wouldn't surprise me." "Can you confirm whether Douglas knew?" "Unlikely. The filings list her as the primary. His name doesn't appear anywhere. If he finds out, he'll realize she's leveraged the family name behind his back." I let the words settle. Veronica hadn't just insulted me. She'd bet her family's dignity on borrowed money from the woman she despised. "Harold," I said, "I want a freeze notice drafted. Quietly. No confrontation yet. I need the full picture first." "I'll handle it. Anything else?" "Yes. Review every transaction tied to her entities. If she's taken 1 bite, she's taken more." "Understood. You'll have a report within the hour." I hung up and stared at the screen, the numbers flickering like candlelight. In finance, greed always leaves fingerprints. The doorbell rang. Julian. He stood in the doorway, tie loosened, hair disheveled. "You weren't answering texts," he said. "I've been working." He stepped inside, glancing around the study. "Veronica told me you met for lunch." "Yes," I said. "She wanted to clear the air." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it. She came home rattled. Said you were evasive. I gave her what she came for. Doubt." "Mom," he said, frustration creeping in. "Why are you playing games? She's my wife. You can't just—" "She's been using company funds." He blinked. "What?" "2 loans, approved under EverWest's umbrella, both tied to her name. She's mortgaged parts of her life to survive the image she's selling." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "That can't be right. She wouldn't—" "She would," I said softly. "And she did. People show you who they are when money's involved. Believe them." He sank into the armchair, eyes wide. "She said your company was—" "My company is stable. Hers is not. And now her instability is trying to reach mine." He looked at me, torn between loyalty and disbelief. "You think she married me for access? I think she married you for opportunity. The access came with the ring." He stared down at his hands, silent. I wanted to comfort him, but truth isn't a balm, it's a blade. "I'll handle it," I said gently. "This isn't your burden." "It's my marriage," he whispered. "And it's her signature," I replied. "Don't confuse the two." When he left, dusk had begun to settle. I stood by the window, watching the sky turn to pewter. Somewhere across town, Veronica was likely composing another strategy, unaware that the walls were already closing in. Harold's report arrived before nightfall. I read it twice. She had drawn on multiple credit lines, all shielded behind corporate shells that crumbled at the slightest pressure. Her debts outweighed her assets 3-1. She wasn't just living beyond her means. She was building an empire on air. I closed the file, resting a hand over the silver pen that had signed 100 deals, but never one this personal. Some people borrow money, others borrow time. Veronica Graves Harding had borrowed both, and both were running out. 2 days later, the Graves penthouse glittered like a stage set. Everything inside felt curated to impress. Marble floors, gilded frames, the faint scent of lilies that masked something sharper beneath. I had been invited for what Veronica called a strategic family conversation. In my experience, strategy was rarely about unity. It was about control. Julian greeted me at the door, shoulders tight. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said. His voice carried that practiced neutrality children use when mediating their parents. Veronica thought it'd be good for us to talk, together. "Talk or negotiate?" I asked. He didn't answer, just motioned toward the dining room. The table was already set, files stacked beside champagne glasses, candles unlit. Veronica stood at the far end, dressed in pale gray, her posture as poised as ever. Douglas and Camille sat nearby, faces arranged in polite tension. "Penelope," Veronica said smoothly, "I appreciate you making the time." "I'm always available when numbers are involved," I replied. She smiled, but her fingers drummed lightly against the folder before her. "We've been reviewing the family's financial landscape. With so many moving parts, Julian's investments, our holdings, Daddy's legacy, it seems prudent to consolidate under one structure. A family office, if you will." Douglas cleared his throat. "A unified strategy would help us weather market shifts," he added. "Pooling assets, diversifying risk. It's common practice." "Common among families that trust each other," I said. "Are we one of those?" Camille's bracelet jingled as she adjusted her sleeve. "We could be," she murmured. Veronica slid a document toward me. "Here's the proposal. Joint oversight, equal voting rights, shared authority across all portfolios, including EverWest's subsidiary stakes." I scanned the first page, recognizing the structure instantly. They were proposing integration, an elegant phrase for infiltration. Julian shifted uneasily. "We just think this could simplify things," he said. "Less duplication, more collaboration." I looked at him. "And whose signature crowns the top of this new empire?" Veronica met my gaze. "We'd rotate chairmanship annually." "How democratic," I said. "And who drafted this?" She hesitated just long enough. "Our legal team." "Not Harold Finch, I assume," I said. "No," she answered. "He seemed protective." "Protective," I echoed. "That's another word for competent." Douglas leaned forward. "Penelope, we're offering partnership, not conflict. No one's trying to take anything." "Of course not," I said. "That's why you're asking for joint authority over a company you don't own." Veronica's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "This isn't about ownership. It's about family alignment. If we're to move forward together, transparency is key." "Transparency," I said softly, "requires honesty. Shall we start there?" Julian placed a hand on the table. "Mom, please, don't turn this into a battle." I turned to him, gentler. "I'm not at war with you, Julian, but you need to know which side is building fortifications." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I slid a sheet from my own folder, Harold's report. 2 loans, both tied to Graves family holdings. both guaranteed by your wife. Douglas's eyes snapped to Veronica. What? They were bridge loans, she said quickly. Short-term liquidity, nothing alarming. You used EverWest funds? Douglas asked, voice tightening. Her silence was answer enough. Camille's hand flew to her pearls. Veronica. Julian looked from her to me, color draining. You knew? I discovered it after Westbrook, I said. Your wife has been treating my company like an ATM. And now she wants shared authority? That's not a family office. That's a hostile takeover in heels. Veronica's composure cracked. You think you can control everything, she snapped. Even your own son. You hide behind that calm voice, pretending to be noble, but you're just prepared, I said. That's the word you're looking for. Douglas stood, anger simmering beneath restraint. We'll review the terms later, he muttered. This isn't the place. Veronica turned to him, pleading. Daddy, listen. But he was already walking toward the balcony, eyes distant. Camille followed, murmuring something about air. Julian stayed seated, staring at the papers between us. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was waiting for proof, I said. Now we have it. He rubbed his temples. She's my wife, Mom. And you're my son, I said softly. That's why I'm giving you truth instead of comfort. Veronica gathered her folder with shaking hands. You think this changes anything? You may have the company, but I have influence. People listen to me. Then use that influence wisely, I said, because soon you'll need every ounce of credibility you have left. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, fury flickering behind her eyes. Without another word, she left the room, her heels striking the floor like a countdown. Julian rose slowly. I don't even know what side I'm on anymore. I touched his arm. The side that still believes integrity is currency. Choose that one. He nodded weakly, then followed her out. Alone again, I gathered the documents and slipped them into my briefcase. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the darkening sky, reflections rippling like shifting loyalties. A family office, she'd called it. But every clause had teeth. And now, I knew exactly which one would bite first. The rain began just after midnight, steady and deliberate, as if the sky itself had decided to wash the city clean. I sat at my desk, a single lamp casting light across stacks of paper, contracts, ledgers, correspondence. The room smelled faintly of cedar and ink. These were the hours I worked best, when the world quieted and truth had nowhere to hide. My phone vibrated once, then again. Harold Finch. He rarely called at this hour unless something required immediate attention. Penelope, he said without preamble. We've got a problem. Bigger than the last one? Potentially. A filing landed at the SEC tonight. Anonymous submission. Claims EverWest manipulated market share through undisclosed subsidiaries. They're requesting an investigation. I leaned back, fingers steepled. Anonymous, you said? Yes, but the language, it's detailed. Whoever wrote it had access to internal data, file names, timelines, even cross-references to merger audits. Someone with proximity, I murmured. Or intent, Harold replied. They attached a USB dump. Metadata suggests a personal laptop, likely consumer-grade encryption. If we can access the raw signature, we might trace it. How soon can you confirm origin? I've already engaged forensics, but Penelope... His voice tightened. The allegations are structured too cleanly. This isn't a whistleblower. It's a chess move. I stared at the rain streaking the window pane. each drop cutting through the city lights like falling glass. Let me guess. They timed the filing before quarter end. Exactly. If the SEC flags it now, they'll freeze several pending approvals. We'll lose momentum on the Westport merger, which would delight anyone with a personal grudge, I said, or a failing balance sheet. Veronica? He asked quietly. She has motive, I said. And access. Julian's credentials, dinner table chatter, fragments of board updates, enough to weave a narrative. I'll prepare a response. Package, Harold said. Denial, documentation, audit trail. We can counter quickly. Good, I said, but don't escalate yet. Let them think their shot landed. He hesitated. You're planning a counterstroke. I'm planning perspective, I replied. Sometimes silence is the loudest rebuttal. Understood. I'll keep you updated. When the call ended, the clock read 1:15. Outside, the storm deepened, thunder rolling like distant applause. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound steady me. Every empire faces a season of accusation. How you respond defines whether you endure. I reached for the file marked Governance, EverWest. Inside were printouts of board approvals, timestamps, compliance sign-offs. Everything clean, every move documented. I had built EverWest like a fortress, one brick of verification at a time. Still, I knew perception could wound faster than truth could heal. The intercom buzzed softly. My assistant's voice, sleepy, apologetic. Mrs. Harding, sorry to disturb you. A courier just arrived. They insisted this couldn't wait. Bring it in. A thin envelope, no return address, sealed with clear tape. I slid it open with my silver letter opener, the one Edward had given me our first year of marriage. Inside, a single sheet. You taught me discretion. Now watch how I use it. No signature, but I didn't need one. Her words carried perfume, confidence, and threat intertwined. I placed the note beside the monitor. Veronica was escalating. She'd gone from covert loans to public sabotage, weaponizing legality like gossip. The question was, did Julian know? Or was he standing in the blast radius, unaware of the match she'd struck? I forwarded Harold's summary to my private inbox, encrypting it under a secondary key. Then I opened the security logs. 2 unauthorized logins last week, both from an external IP late at night. Accessing folders labeled Legacy Files, Julian's home network. A cold heaviness settled in my chest. He must have left his laptop unattended. Veronica wouldn't need to hack what she could simply open. For a long moment, I sat in silence, tracing the rim of my teacup. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about narrative, who controlled the story. And in a world obsessed with appearances, guilt was irrelevant if you owned the microphone. I rose, crossing to the window. The rain blurred the skyline into watercolor shades of gray. Somewhere beyond the fog, Douglas Graves was likely pacing, wondering why his daughter looked so calm while his fortune trembled. Camille would be rehearsing sympathy, Julian rehearsing apologies. And me? I rehearsed patience. You don't fight storms with noise. You fortify the foundation and wait for the clouds to tire. I returned to my desk, drafting a note to Harold. Prepare a holding statement. No comment until inquiry received. Assemble audit trail B. Schedule internal review tomorrow, 10 a.m. Boardroom East Wing. Then another message, shorter, to Julian. Breakfast. My place. 7 sharp. We need to talk. I hit send, closed the laptop, and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, save for the city's faint reflection on the glass. Veronica wanted exposure. She'd mistaken visibility for victory. But daylight doesn't discriminate. It illuminates both the hunter and the trap she set. As I walked down the hall, the letter opener glinted briefly in my hand before I set it aside. Edward once told me every storm has two options: drown or cleanse. By morning, I intended to choose. The sky was pale when Julian arrived, carrying the weight of another sleepless night. His tie was crooked, his eyes red, and he smelled faintly of rain and regret. He hesitated in the doorway, as though crossing the threshold meant stepping into a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Coffee?" I asked, motioning toward the table. He nodded, sat down, and clasped his hands together. "I got your message. What's going on, Mom? You sounded serious." I poured him a cup, added a touch of milk, then took my seat across from him. "I wish I weren't, but there's something you need to see." I reached into the leather folder beside me and drew out a set of printed pages, black and white, grainy but unmistakable. Julian frowned, scanning the first image. It showed me, leaving my office 2 weeks ago, coat buttoned, briefcase in hand. The second, me stepping into Harold's car, head slightly turned toward the camera. Another frame, me at the bank lobby, reviewing documents with a client. He looked up, confused. "What is this?" "Surveillance," I said. "A private investigator followed me for 3 weeks. Different angles, different days. These are excerpts from his report." Julian blinked, still not understanding. "Why would someone—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. "No, she wouldn't." "She did." I slid the last photo forward. The date and timestamp glared from the corner. Beneath it, a signature from the contracting client. V. Graves Harding. Julian's face drained of color. "She hired someone to follow you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And not just me. Harold traced the payment. Cash transfer from a discretionary account opened under her maiden name." He leaned back, shaking his head. "Why would she do that?" "To gather leverage," I replied. "Information she could spin into her own story. Anything to justify her next move." Julian stared down at the images, knuckles whitening around the paper. "This is insane. She said she was stressed, but I thought it was the loans, the merger talk. She never said—" "She wouldn't," I said gently. "People rarely confess the things that expose their intentions." He rubbed his temples, voice trembling. "I thought she was just trying to prove herself. I thought maybe she felt overshadowed. But this? Spying on you?" "She wasn't looking for truth," I said. "She was looking for ammunition." He pushed the photos away as if they burned. "God, I defended her. I told you she was just nervous after the wedding. I told everyone to give her a chance." I reached across the table, resting a hand over his. "You loved her. That's not a crime. Trusting someone doesn't make you foolish, Julian. It makes you human." He swallowed hard. "What else do you know?" "She's been pulling threads," I said. "Digging into corporate records, manipulating your access to internal reports, even submitting false claims to the SEC. This isn't curiosity anymore. It's warfare." Julian looked at me, eyes wide with realization. "The anonymous filing. They said it had inside data. She must have used my laptop." "I believe so," I said. "The security logs confirm access from your network. Same night you two hosted that dinner party." He shut his eyes, as if replaying every conversation. "She asked to borrow it, for the playlist. I didn't think twice. She counted on that." The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint clink of the clock on the mantel. Outside, the bay shimmered in the gray morning light. After a long pause, he said softly, "What do we do now?" I stood, crossing to the window. You decide what kind of man you want to be. He frowned. What do you mean? Some people cling to loyalty even as it strangles them. Others face truth, however painful. I can fight this battle legally, strategically, but the choice to stand beside me or behind her, that's yours. Julian's voice cracked. She's my wife. And I'm your mother, I said. But beyond titles, we're talking about integrity. She broke the law, Julian. She turned your trust into a weapon. You can't fix a house while someone's tearing out the foundation. He looked away, breathing uneven. I don't even know who she is anymore. She's who she's always been, I said softly. You're just seeing her clearly now. He stared at the report, then back at me. If she did all this, what happens next? She'll try to control the narrative, I said. Play the victim, accuse us of overreach, but I have documentation, timestamps, forensic trails. The moment she steps forward, truth will follow. Julian rose slowly, folding the pages, his hands shaking. I need time to process this. Take it, I said. But don't take too long. The longer silence lasts, the louder deception grows. He slipped the papers into his briefcase, hesitated at the door. Mom, I'm sorry. For what? For doubting you. I gave him a small smile. Faith isn't measured by the absence of doubt, Julian. It's measured by what you do once you see the truth. He nodded, eyes glistening, then left without another word. When the door closed, I turned back to the window. The fog was lifting, revealing the city beneath. Streets, bridges, glass towers catching the light. Everything visible now. Everything exposed. I gathered the photographs into a single pile and tied them with a silk ribbon. They weren't just evidence. They were testimony. Proof that silence, when betrayed, becomes sharper than any blade. And somewhere across town, Veronica Graves Harding was likely celebrating her cleverness, unaware that the very report she commissioned would be the key that unlocked her undoing. The truth, after all, doesn't need revenge. It only needs daylight. By the time the boardroom filled, the air felt heavier than the rain clouds outside. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lights, every chair occupied by faces that knew how to mask curiosity with courtesy. It wasn't a formal meeting, at least not on the surface. It was a family discussion, the kind that starts with pleasantries and ends with power. Douglas Graves sat at one end, fingers interlaced, his composure fraying beneath the calm. Camille perched beside him, pale and silent, twisting a handkerchief she would later claim was for dust. Veronica took the seat opposite me, spine straight, lips painted confidence. Julian hovered near the middle, hands folded, expression unreadable. Harold Finch stood discreetly at my right, his presence both shield and signal. We were not here for conversation. We were here for clarity. Thank you for coming, Douglas began, voice taut. Given recent tensions, it seemed wise to speak face to face. Transparency is always wise, I said. Veronica crossed her legs, her heels catching the light. I agree. After all, misunderstandings grow in silence. A flicker of irony passed between us. Douglas shifted. An anonymous SEC filing has triggered an inquiry. Allegations against EverWest Holdings. I'm told they're serious. Serious enough to merit truth, I said, which is why we're here. Harold slid a small silver recorder onto the table. Its presence drew every gaze. What's that? Camille asked softly. Perspective, I replied. Courtesy of your daughter. Veronica's eyes darted toward the device, then back to me. What game are you playing? No games, just clarity. I believe you'll recognize your own voice. Harold pressed play. A moment of static, then the room filled with her laughter. Light, deliberate, unmistakable. "Marriage is strategy," her voice said, smooth as silk. "You align with assets, not affections. Julian's mother is the key. Once she's eased out, the holdings open up. My father can take board control." The sound of clinking glasses followed. Then another voice, Camille's, nervous. "Are you sure, dear? She seems competent." "Competent and old," Veronica replied. "She won't see it coming." The room froze. Douglas's jaw locked. Camille's hand dropped her handkerchief. Julian's breath caught, a small sound that cut through the silence. Harold stopped the recording. That excerpt was retrieved from a data card found in a surveillance folder, encrypted under initials VGH. The audio is time-stamped 2 months before the wedding. Veronica pushed back her chair, face draining of color. "That's not... It's been edited. Authenticity verified," Harold said calmly. "Chain of custody intact. We have forensic signatures if you'd like to dispute." Douglas turned slowly toward his daughter. "You said you wanted family unity." Daddy, please, this isn't what it sounds like." "It sounds," he said coldly, "like conspiracy." Camille covered her mouth, eyes wide. "Veronica, tell me this isn't true." Veronica's hands trembled, but her voice sharpened. "You think she's innocent? She's been pulling strings for years, hiding behind those quiet smiles. You're all falling for her performance." Julian rose, voice breaking. "Enough!" She flinched. He stepped closer, holding up the printed surveillance report I'd given him earlier. "You hired someone to follow my mother. You hacked my laptop. You stole confidential data and filed false claims. And now..." He slammed the report onto the table. "This..." Tears welled in his eyes. "I loved you. I defended you. And you turned our life into leverage." Veronica's voice cracked. "Julian, I did it for us." "No," he said softly. "You did it for you." Silence settled again, thick as fog. Douglas stood, shoulders sagging under the weight of recognition. "You used my name, my reputation, my trust, all for a scheme." She reached toward him, but he stepped back. Camille whispered, "My own daughter," before lifting her hand and striking Veronica across the cheek. The sound echoed like punctuation. Veronica gasped, eyes glistening, not from pain, but disbelief. "You're all against me," she hissed. "Every one of you." "No," I said quietly. "We're simply finished enabling you." She turned to me, trembling. "You think you've won?" "This isn't a contest," I replied. "It's an audit." Her eyes narrowed, fury overtaking fear. "You can't erase me from his life." "Nor would I," I said. "But you've written yourself out of his trust." Harold retrieved the recorder, placing it back into his briefcase. "We'll forward certified copies to counsel. The SEC inquiry will be met with full cooperation and evidence of malicious intent." Douglas nodded stiffly. "I'll make a formal statement distancing our family from these actions." Julian sank back into his chair, face in his hands. "I can't believe this." I reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. Belief is the first step toward rebuilding. Across the table, Veronica's voice softened, desperate now. "Julian, please. I can fix this." He looked at her, eyes hollow. "You already did, just not the way you think." She opened her mouth, but no, words came. Only silence, finally honest. I rose, smoothing the sleeve of my suit. "This meeting is adjourned." As we left, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm had finally reached its crescendo. Some truths break glass, others break illusions. And in that room, surrounded by witnesses and whispers, Veronica Graves Harding's empire of deception shattered in one undeniable sound, her own voice. The next morning dawned clear, the rain gone, the sky rinsed of storm. My office was still and bright, sunlight spilling across the polished desk where a single folder waited, white, crisp, final. Some decisions don't need noise, they just need ink. Julian sat opposite me, sleeves rolled, his face pale but steady. He hadn't spoken much since the meeting. Shock takes its time before turning into resolve. She hasn't stopped calling, he said quietly. Texts, emails, everything. She says she wants a chance to explain. Explanations don't rebuild trust, I replied. They just circle it. He nodded, eyes lowering to the folder. Is this the exit offer? I said. Clean, lawful, and merciful. He reached for the folder, thumb tracing the edge. You're really giving her $3 million? It's cheaper than chaos, I said. And silence has a price. This buys peace, for her, for you, for the company. Julian flipped through the pages. A settlement, withdrawal of her SEC claim, confidentiality clause, relinquishment of all financial ties. He looked up. And she signs within 24 hours? Yes, I said. If she refuses, Harold will forward every document and recording to the commission. She'll lose more than reputation then. He exhaled, long and weary. She won't go quietly. She will when she realizes the alternative. A knock at the door. Harold stepped in, precise as always, holding a duplicate file. She's on her way up, he said. No attorney with her. Good, I murmured. This needs truth, not performance. Julian stood when the door opened. Veronica entered slowly, her eyes rimmed red, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I came alone. That's wise, I said. Sit. She took the seat across from me, hands folded tight. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence did what it always does. It stripped away pretense. Finally, she whispered, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Yet it did, I said. She swallowed hard. I thought if I could prove myself, if I could match you. By deceit? I asked. By surveillance? False filings? Theft? Her lip trembled. I panicked. My father's company was failing. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I impressed him, he'd respect you. I finished. But you can't buy respect with borrowed power. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry. Julian's voice broke the quiet. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Veronica. She turned to him, pleading. I loved you. He shook his head. You loved the access. Tears slid down her cheeks, slow and silent. Please, I can make this right. Just give me time. I opened the folder, sliding the papers toward her. You have 24 hours. Sign this, and we close every door gently. Refuse, and the law closes them for you. She stared at the documents, blinking through tears. $3 million? Consider it tuition, I said. You've learned the cost of ambition without integrity. Her hand hovered over the pen. And after I sign? You walk away, I said. No lawsuits, no headlines, no access. You start over, quietly. She looked at Julian again. And us? He hesitated, voice low. I'll always wish you'd chosen truth. She pressed her lips together, then lowered her gaze. For a moment, the room felt heavy with the weight of all the words they'd never say again. Finally, she signed. Her hand shook, but the ink was steady. Harold took the papers, checked each signature, then nodded. Executed. Veronica stood, clutching her purse like a lifeline. You win, she whispered. This isn't victory, I said softly. It's release. She paused at the door, glancing back. What happens now? You find out who you are when no one's watching, I said. It's the only audit that matters. Her eyes lingered on Julian one last time before she left, heels clicking down the hall, each step fading like the echo of a vanished empire. When the door closed, Julian sank into his chair, covering his face. I thought marriage meant partnership. It does, I said gently, when both partners stand on truth. Otherwise, it's just paperwork. He dropped his hands, eyes weary but clear. What will you do now? Finish what's left, I said, then rest. Harold gathered the folder, slipping it into his briefcase. I'll courier a copy to her counsel. Funds transfer upon confirmation. Thank you, Harold, I said, for everything. He inclined his head. Justice served quietly is still justice. After he left, Julian rose and came to stand beside me. You could have destroyed her. I don't build strength by breaking others, I said, only by knowing when to stop. He nodded, eyes glassy. You're remarkable, Mom. No, I said softly, just seasoned. The afternoon light stretched long across the floor, warm and forgiving. For the first time in weeks, the air felt clean. I reached for my silver pen, the same one Edward had given me decades ago, and placed it back in its case. One more signature, one more ending. Justice didn't roar today. It whispered. And sometimes that's enough. The envelope lay on the table like a final heartbeat, sealed, witnessed, complete. I turned it once, twice, letting the weight of it settle into the quiet. Some papers carry more than ink. They hold the end of illusions. Julian stood by the window, staring out at the bay. Morning light skimmed the surface, calm and gold, a stark contrast to the storm we'd survived. He hadn't spoken since Harold left with the documents. There are moments when language feels too small. She signed, he said finally, voice soft. I watched her do it, but part of me still doesn't believe it's over. It's over, I said gently. Not neatly, but cleanly. He turned toward me, eyes clouded with grief and relief folded into one. I keep thinking about how we started, how proud I was walking down that aisle with her. I thought love was supposed to make life bigger. Sometimes it just magnifies what was already there, I said. You can't fix someone by marrying them, Julian. You only share the consequences. He managed a faint, rueful smile. You always said the hardest lessons don't come from failure, but from forgiveness. And from knowing when to stop fighting battles that aren't yours, I added. He crossed the room, took a seat across from me. What happens now? Now, I said, you rebuild. Quietly, you learn what peace sounds like, and you let silence teach you where trust begins again. Julian nodded, eyes glistening. I'm sorry you had to go through this, that she hurt you, that I didn't see it sooner. I reached for his hand, steady and warm. You can't be sorry for believing the best in people. That's how hearts stay human. Just don't ignore what truth shows you next time. He squeezed my hand, then let go, exhaling deeply. You think she'll be all right? She will, I said. Pain has a way of refining people, if they let it. What she does with her second chance is up to her. He nodded slowly, gaze drifting back to the window. Outside, a ferry cut across the bay, leaving a clean wake behind it. For the first time in months, I felt the world unclench. No more hidden filings. No more quiet wars fought in boardrooms and dining rooms. Only stillness. I rose, walked to my desk, and took the silver pen from its case. The same pen that had signed mergers, contracts, settlements, each a chapter closed. I set it atop the envelope and whispered, You've done enough. Julian watched me, eyes soft. You're really letting go, aren't you? Yes, I said. Holding on is heavy. Freedom needs empty hands. He crossed the room, pulling me into an embrace. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His heartbeat was steady, no longer frantic with confusion. Thank you, he said quietly, for fighting the right way. There's no other way, I replied. Noise wins attention. Silence wins ground. When he left, the apartment felt lighter. Not empty, just spacious, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. I stood by the window, watching the sunlight spill wider across the bay. Somewhere out there, Veronica was facing the quiet she'd never learned to sit with. Perhaps, in time, she'd discover that silence isn't punishment. It's the start of understanding. I turned back to the table, laid my palm on the sealed envelope, and smiled. 2 lives freed. Hers from deceit, mine from the burden of proving truth. Sometimes mercy looks like money. Sometimes it looks like distance. Today, it looked like a signature written in steady hand and steady heart. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt and new beginnings. I closed my eyes, breathed it in, and let go. A month later, I moved across the bridge to East Bay. The sea felt closer here, saltier, freer, less concerned with reputation. My new house was smaller, all white walls and wide windows, sunlight spilling across floors that smelled faintly of cedar. It didn't need chandeliers or marble, just peace. Each morning, I brewed tea in my Chino cup and opened the balcony doors. The world sounded different when no one expected you to explain yourself. Gulls circled, children laughed on the boardwalk, and the bay rippled like a page turned by wind. Harold stopped by once a week, dropping off updates I rarely read. Everwest Holdings was steady, its board quiet, its reputation clean. Douglas Graves had stepped back from public life. Camille was said to be volunteering at a charity for women's literacy. Veronica had left the city. Some said she'd gone south to teach accounting at a community college. I hoped that was true. Teaching requires humility, and she had plenty to learn. Julian visited often. Sometimes we spoke for hours. Sometimes we just sat with coffee and silence. Healing doesn't need narration. It just needs presence. He had started consulting again, smaller clients, fewer risks. I saw something new in him now, something unburdened. The sharpness of ambition replaced by steadier kindness. One afternoon, as I sorted through letters on my desk, a cream envelope caught my eye. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note and a photograph. Thank you for believing women like me still matter. The photo showed a small office, freshly painted, with a brass plate on the door. Harbor Grant recipient, East Bay Women's Cooperative. Standing beside it was a woman in her 40s, smiling through tears. I remembered her face, soft, freckled, uncertain. Years ago, she'd been one of Veronica's classmates, mocked for dreaming beyond her means. Now she held a clipboard and hope in equal measure. I traced the photo's edges, a quiet warmth blooming in my chest. The first grant had gone exactly where it was meant to, toward rebuilding someone the world once overlooked. The fund would grow, one story at a time. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window. The bay shimmered under a silver moon, each wave a whispered reminder that nothing stays still forever. Some tides bring loss, others bring return. I thought of Edward, my late husband, and the promise we'd shared. Use what you know to make gentler places for those who come after. It had taken me decades to understand that gentleness isn't weakness. its precision, the art of choosing peace without surrendering power. I lifted my tea, steam curling into the night air. Somewhere out there, women were learning to trust their own signatures again. For those who were told to be quiet, I murmured, watching the flame steady itself, we heard you. And as the candle burned low, I realized that every silence I'd endured had become something larger, a bridge, not a wound. The wind shifted, carrying laughter from the pier, the scent of jasmine, the hum of life moving forward. I closed my eyes, letting it all in. Justice had been served quietly. Love had taught, not pleased. And at last, peace had a name. Penelope Harding, of the East Bay.